I never imagined that one day, I would stand in the house I've cherished for so long and look out the window, feeling like I no longer recognized it. The house felt different. Quiet, yes, but there was a weight in the air, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was as though the walls themselves were holding something back, something they were waiting to reveal. It wasn't just the house that had changed, it was me. I was standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to face. That day, when I hired Chloe to clean the house while I met an old friend for coffee, I thought it would be the perfect break. Just a simple, relaxing afternoon. After all, it had been years since I'd seen Elena, and I was looking forward to catching up. We sat under the shade of a large tree at a quaint cafe, sipping our drinks and reminiscing about the past. Elena was full of energy, telling me about her life in the city, her children, and the adventures she had. It felt good to reconnect, to laugh again, to remember a simpler time. But just as I was starting to relax, I heard the phone buzzing in my pocket. It was Chloe. She had been cleaning upstairs while I was out, and she sounded shaken when she called. "Mrs. Emily, is anyone else in the house?" Her voice was trembling, and something in her tone made my stomach twist. I told her to calm down, to explain what was going on, but she only replied with, "I saw a woman upstairs, in a white dress. She just disappeared into a room." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I told Chloe to lock the door and wait outside, and I rushed back home, my mind racing. What was going on? I couldn't make sense of it. As I drove back, my thoughts swirled in a haze of confusion. I kept telling myself that it was probably nothing, that Chloe must have imagined it. But deep down, I felt it, a cold knot in my stomach that told me it was more than that. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When I arrived, Chloe was sitting on the front step, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. I hurried over to her, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, Chloe. It's just your imagination." But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them myself. The police came and searched the house. They found no signs of anyone breaking in. All the windows were locked, no footprints, no broken windows, nothing. It didn't make sense. But Chloe had seen something. I could tell she wasn't lying. She was genuinely scared. And I was scared too, but I couldn't admit it. I wanted to believe that it was just an accident, just a moment of fear. But in my gut, I knew that something was hiding in the shadows of this house, something I had never noticed before. For the next few days, I tried to push the feeling aside, but it lingered, creeping into my thoughts like a shadow I couldn't escape. And at night, when the house was still, I could swear I heard something. Whispers, soft footsteps, the rustling of something in the dark. I told myself it was just the house settling, old wood creaking. But the sound of the whispers, they felt different. They felt alive. One afternoon, while I was going through some papers in Lucas' study, I found something unexpected. It was an old leather-bound notebook, hidden beneath a pile of papers. It was a little dusty, but it looked ancient. I opened it, and the first thing I noticed was the handwriting. It was beautiful, flowing, like it had been written by someone who took their time, unlike Lucas' usual fast, typed-up work. The pages were filled with stories, plot outlines, character descriptions, things that seemed so familiar to me, like something out of the novels Lucas had written. But these weren't his words. They were hers. The handwriting was unmistakable. It belonged to a woman. I could tell by the style, the careful strokes. But who was she? And why did Lucas have her notebook hidden in his study? I knew Lucas wasn't the type to keep things from me. At least, I thought he wasn't. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest as I flipped through the pages. I needed answers. After finding the notebook, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked Lucas about it when he came home, but he brushed me off with a casual laugh. "It's just some old papers from a fan, Emily. Nothing to worry about." But something in the way he said it didn't sit right with me. It was too calm, too dismissive. I couldn't let it go. I had to know more. That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, I made up my mind. I was going to search the attic. The door was always locked, but that night, for the first time, I noticed that it was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open. The attic was dim, the air heavy with dust. But what I saw in the corner took my breath away. There, sitting at a small wooden desk, was a woman. She had long, tangled hair and was wearing a faded white dress, her face hidden behind her hands as she scribbled something on a piece of paper. I froze, unable to move or speak. My mind was struggling to catch up with my body. And then she looked up. Her eyes were empty, tired, like she hadn't seen the light of day in years. And yet, there was something so familiar about her. I couldn't place it at first, but then it hit me. This was Megan, Lucas' sister. The one he had always told me had disappeared when they were young. But there she was, alive, sitting in the attic. I had no idea how to process it. Megan's story came pouring out. The truth that Lucas had kept hidden for so long. Years ago, when Megan was just a young woman, she had been involved in a tragic accident. A man had been killed, and Lucas, my husband, had made a choice that would haunt him forever. Rather than call for help, Lucas chose to cover up the incident. He convinced Megan that they had to hide her away, keep her out of sight, because if the truth came out, their family would be destroyed. So, for years, she had lived in the attic, hidden from the world. Megan explained how she had tried to escape, how she had written to keep herself sane. But Lucas had found her words, and he used them, turning her talent into his own. Every novel he published, every success he had, was built on the foundation of Megan's pain. The weight of it hit me all at once. I had been living in a lie, married to a man who had betrayed me, who had betrayed his own sister for the sake of his career. I had to make a choice. I had to decide whether to keep Lucas' secret or to face the truth. I thought about the years I had spent with him, the family we had built. But I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Not when it was right in front of me. Megan needed justice. She deserved to be free, to live her life without hiding in the shadows. And so did I. I couldn't live in this house, in this life, knowing that the person I loved had done something so cruel. So, I made the call. I reached out to the authorities, and the truth finally came to light. After I made that call, things moved quickly, faster than I could keep up with. The police came, and with them, the weight of everything I had just uncovered began to crash down on me. I was no longer just a wife, no longer just someone caught in a quiet, suburban life. I was now a witness, a person who had to face the uncomfortable truth, no matter how hard it was. The house, the place I had called home for so many years, felt different. It wasn't just the quiet hum of the old wood settling, or the familiar creak of the stairs. It was the oppressive silence, the kind that makes you feel like something is watching, waiting. I walked through the house with an unsettled heart, trying to make sense of it all. Every room held memories, some good, some painful. But now, they all felt tainted by the lie I had been living. As the investigation unfolded, I learned more details about Lucas, things I never could have imagined. Megan, despite all the years of confinement, had never once tried to leave. She had written her stories, pouring her pain into them, but they were always for herself, never meant for the world to see. That was until she met Lucas. He had found her stories, read them, and saw the opportunity to use them for his own gain. He encouraged her to keep writing, promising her that one day, they would be shared with the world. But that promise was empty. I remember the night I went to see Megan again. After everything had been exposed, after Lucas was arrested, I couldn't let her go. I had to see her, to hear her side of the story. I needed to understand the depths of the betrayal, but also the strength it had taken for her to survive all those years. Megan had been moved to a safe house after the police took Lucas away. I went to visit her one afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. The place was quiet, almost too quiet. There was no rush of activity, no voices from neighbors, no hum of passing cars. Just silence, and the weight of everything that had happened. When I walked into the room where Megan was waiting, I could see the toll it had all taken on her. Her eyes were tired, sunken, like someone who had spent years living in a constant state of fear. She looked up as I entered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't know what to say. What words could possibly make up for all the years she had lost? For all the years I had lost. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but steady. I never wanted any of this. I never wanted to hurt anyone, least of all you. She paused, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I thought maybe if I stayed hidden long enough, if I stayed quiet enough, I could just disappear. I sat across from her, trying to find the right words, but they eluded me. I had so many questions, so many things I wanted to say, but in that moment, all I could do was listen. Megan's story came pouring out, her pain and guilt hanging in the air between us like a thick fog. She told me about the years she spent writing in that attic, about the fear she felt every time Lucas came to see her. She told me how he had used her words to build his career, how he had promised to help her, but instead, he had kept her locked away. Her eyes, once full of light and hope, were now shadows of the person she used to be. I thought I was protecting everyone, she said, her voice breaking. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I did what he said, I could keep you safe from the truth. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I reached out and took her hand, trying to offer some comfort. You didn't do this. You didn't make this happen. It was him. It was always him. Megan nodded, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. I know. But it's hard not to blame myself, you know? I was his sister. I should have known. I should have fought harder. I didn't have the answers she was looking for, and in truth, I wasn't sure I had the answers for myself either. The guilt I felt for not seeing the truth sooner, for not questioning Lucas more, weighed heavily on me. How could I have lived all these years with someone who had done such terrible things? How could I have missed the signs? I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person I was, to have been so blind. But deep down, I knew I had to let go of that guilt. I wasn't the one who had betrayed Megan. I wasn't the one who had kept her hidden away, writing in silence. And yet, a part of me still wanted to blame myself. Blame myself for loving a man who could do such things. But I couldn't. I couldn't allow myself to carry that weight. Megan had paid her price, and now, it was time for her to heal. But the healing wasn't going to be easy. The scars she had from years of isolation, from the betrayal, from the lies, those would take a lifetime to overcome. And yet, there was a strength in her I hadn't seen before. Despite everything that had happened, she was still standing. She was still here, and she wasn't going to let the past define her. It was as though, for the first time, she could breathe again. In the weeks that followed, things began to settle. Lucas was in custody, awaiting trial. The media swarmed, trying to get the details, trying to get a glimpse of the woman who had been hidden away for so long. But Megan wasn't interested in their attention. She wasn't interested in the fame or the scandal. All she wanted was peace, and I wanted that for her too. We spent days together, going over the stories she had written, the ones that had been locked away for so long. It was clear that her talent was undeniable. Her words were raw, full of emotion, and the world deserved to hear them. We made a decision together. We would publish her stories. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about taking down Lucas. It was about giving Megan the freedom she had been denied for so long. And more than that, it was about giving her the chance to share her voice with the world, something she had wanted for years. The day the book was published, I was with her. She held the first copy in her hands, her fingers trembling as she turned the pages. There in those pages was her life, her truth, laid bare for everyone to see. And for the first time in years, she smiled. I did it, she whispered, almost to herself. I finally did it. The days that followed Megan's book release were surreal. The world was finally hearing her story, and it was impossible not to feel a sense of accomplishment in the air. Her work was more than just words on a page. It was the beginning of a new life for her, a life outside the shadow of what had been done to her. The media buzzed with curiosity, interviews, and public appearances, but Megan was hesitant. She had never wanted this kind of attention. She just wanted her truth to be acknowledged, to be recognized as more than just Lucas' hidden secret. We spent hours together, reviewing every detail, every line of the book. It was as if she had poured her entire soul into it, and I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders with every passing day. It was no longer just the act of telling her story, it was the act of reclaiming it. But as much as I admired her strength, I also saw the scars. Megan wasn't just a survivor of isolation, she was a survivor of manipulation, a woman who had spent decades trapped in her own mind, convinced that the only way to protect the people she loved was to disappear. Now, the world knew, and though there was a sense of freedom in that, it was also a burden. Her next step was clear, facing the consequences of everything that had happened. The trial was coming, and with it, the uncomfortable realization that Lucas was going to have to answer for everything. There was a part of me that felt a strange sense of relief at the thought of him finally being held accountable for what he had done. But there was also something else, something dark, that twisted in my chest. What had happened to my marriage, to the life I thought I knew? The courtroom was crowded. The air was thick with tension. For so long, I had been on the outside looking in, a wife, a bystander to the drama that was unfolding before me. But now, I was a witness. I wasn't just observing anymore, I was part of the story, a key player in a drama that had begun long before I even realized it. Lucas sat across from me, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly in his lap. The man I had married, the man I had trusted, was now nothing more than a stranger. The things I had thought I knew about him were slipping away, piece by piece. His carefully crafted persona, the loving husband, the successful writer, it was all a lie. I tried to remind myself that this was justice, that Megan deserved this, but there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. As the prosecution laid out the details of Lucas' crimes, how he had kept Megan hidden for years, how he had stolen her work, how he had manipulated her, I watched him shrink. I watched his confidence falter, his once proud demeanor crumbling under the weight of the truth. And yet, there was no apology, no remorse. It wasn't until Megan took the stand that I felt my breath catch in my throat. The woman I had seen in the attic, the woman who had been locked away for so many years, was standing in front of a room full of strangers, telling her story to the world. The courage it took for her to do that, to relive the worst moments of her life in front of everyone, was something I could never fully understand. She spoke softly, her voice trembling at first, but with each word, she grew stronger. She spoke of the years she spent in silence, the fear she lived with, and the betrayal she had felt from Lucas. And then, she spoke of the hope she had never let go of, the hope that one day, she would be free. The courtroom was silent as Megan's words filled the air. I could see the faces of the jury, the judge, and even the spectators, moved by the raw honesty of what she had been through. It was a moment of triumph, a moment of redemption for her, but also a moment of loss for me. Because no matter how much I wanted to believe that I could still save my marriage, I knew that it was over. Lucas had taken everything from us, everything from me. Lucas was convicted on all counts. His life, as he had known it, was over. The fame, the career, the lies, everything crumbled in an instant. As the gavel came down, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of finality. This was it. The end of a chapter one had never expected to turn. When I returned home that night, the house felt emptier than ever before. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar surfaces, but it was all different now. The space was still full of memories, but the weight of the lies that had lived within these walls was too much to bear. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. I couldn't live in the house where everything had fallen apart. Megan's words echoed in my mind as I walked through the empty halls. She had forgiven me, even though I had been a part of the life that had kept her hidden. She had found the strength to forgive herself, but I was still struggling to forgive Lucas. How could I? How could I forgive the man who had turned my life upside down and used my love for him as a weapon? Megan's life was beginning anew. The book was a success, and people around the world were moved by her story. She was no longer just Lucas' sister or the woman who had been hidden away. She was a writer, a survivor, a force in her own right. I couldn't be more proud of her. She had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into something beautiful, something that could change lives. And for me, I was slowly learning to rebuild my own life. The path ahead wasn't clear, but I knew it had to be different. I couldn't stay in this house, and I couldn't continue living with the shadows of the past hanging over me. I had to let go of the guilt, the anger, and the pain. I packed my things, one box at a time, and with each item I placed into the box, I felt the weight of the past lifting. It wasn't about forgetting, it was about moving forward, about creating a new life. A life that wasn't defined by Lucas or by the secrets he had kept. I moved to a small apartment in the city, away from the house where everything had fallen apart. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And in that small space, I found a quiet peace. I knew that life wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting over. Megan and I stayed in touch, of course. We had both been through so much, and now we were helping each other navigate the new lives we were building. I would visit her in her new apartment, and we would talk about everything and nothing. We were still healing, still finding our way, but I knew that whatever happened, we would face it together. Life, they say, has a way of moving forward, even when we think we can't keep up. It was just a few months after the trial, and as the days went by, I began to realize that even though the past could never be erased, it no longer held the same power over me. I was still standing, still breathing, and I wasn't about to let the shadow of what had happened consume me. There were days when I missed the old version of my life, when I was just Samantha, a wife, a friend, a daughter. But now, there was more to me than just those roles. I had learned to stand on my own, to take ownership of my own story, and that felt like freedom. Megan's success with her book was both humbling and inspiring. Every time she called to update me on her progress, I could hear the excitement in her voice. The woman who had once been a ghost in her own home was now a celebrated author, her words reaching across the globe. I knew that nothing could take away the scars of her past, but this new chapter, this new life she was building, was her redemption. She had earned it, every single bit of it. And as for me, well, I had my own redemption to find. I had always put others first. Lucas, my family, my friends. But now, I had to focus on me. I needed to rebuild the parts of myself that had been lost in the chaos. I needed to learn how to trust again, not just others, but myself. As I settled into my new apartment, I realized something important. The journey I had been on, though painful, had shaped me into someone stronger, someone more aware of the world around her. It was no longer about holding on to the past or trying to recreate what was lost. It was about building something new, something real. I found peace in the small things. The quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, the late afternoons spent reading in my favorite chair, the nights when I could finally sleep without the weight of fear or regret pressing down on me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. It was the life I was building, one brick at a time, and it felt like I was finally on the right path. Megan came to visit me one weekend, and we spent the day talking about everything and nothing. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were just two friends, not two women bound by pain and betrayal. You know, Sam, Megan said, her voice thoughtful as she looked out the window, there's so much more to us than just the people we used to be. We're not just survivors. We're creators. We're making something new, something we can be proud of. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. She was right. We were both creating something new. And it wasn't just the books or the stories. It was our lives, our futures. We weren't defined by what had happened to us. We were defined by how we chose to rise above it. As the months turned into years, I realized that the hardest part wasn't facing the truth. It was letting go of the things that held me back. I had carried so much weight for so long, trying to protect others, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But in the end, it was that very burden that had kept me trapped. I hadn't realized it at first, but letting go of Lucas, of the life I had built with him, had been the first step toward my own freedom. I hadn't just freed myself from him, I had freed myself from the past. I had learned that it was okay to walk away from things that no longer served me, that no longer brought me peace. It wasn't just about moving on, it was about making space for something better, something truer. And I had found that in my own way. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. One day, as I was sorting through some old boxes in my new apartment, I came across a picture of Lucas and me from when we first got married. We looked so young, so hopeful. It was a reminder of a time before everything changed. I stared at it for a long while, taking in the image of the couple we had been, before the secrets, before the lies. I didn't feel anger when I looked at the picture. Instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was as though I was finally able to let go of that version of myself, the one who had been so wrapped up in someone else's story. And in that moment, I realized that the woman in the picture wasn't me anymore. I had changed. I had grown. And I was finally free. The last step, I knew, was to forgive myself. I had carried so much guilt for so long, wondering if I had missed the signs, if I had somehow failed Megan, if I could have stopped it all from happening. But the truth was, I had done the best I could. I had been a wife, a friend, a person who tried to make the right choices, even when the path wasn't clear. And that was enough. I placed the picture in the box, closed the lid, and set it aside. It was time to move forward. As the years passed, both Megan and I continued to thrive. Megan's books became bestsellers, and she found a sense of fulfillment in her work, in the world that now knew her name. She had become the writer she had always dreamed of being, and more than that, she had become a symbol of resilience, of reclaiming your life no matter the odds. As for me, I continued to explore new possibilities. I started writing, telling my own story. Not the story of the woman who had been deceived, but the story of the woman who had survived. I poured my heart into every page, letting go of the fear of judgment, of failure. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. And one day, I received an email from a publisher, asking me to write my own book. I was stunned. For years, I had kept my story locked inside, afraid to share it with the world. But now it was time. It was time to let others hear what I had learned, the lessons I had gained from the pain, the betrayal, and the journey to healing. As I sat at my desk, ready to begin the next chapter of my life, I realized that this was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I stopped living in the shadow of the past and started embracing the light of the future. The day the book deal came through was one of those rare, surreal moments in life. I sat in my small apartment, the city humming quietly outside my window, and stared at the contract in front of me. It was just a piece of paper, but to me, it symbolized so much more. It wasn't just the opportunity to tell my story, it was the chance to reclaim something I had lost, my voice. I had spent so many years living in the shadows, first as a wife trying to hold on to a crumbling marriage, then as someone who had been blind to the truth of the man I married. I'd spent so much of my life being afraid of the truth, afraid of what would happen if I let go of the past, afraid of starting over. But now, here I was, ready to write my own story. And it wasn't just about the betrayal or the pain I had endured. It was about all the things I had learned along the way, about resilience, about forgiveness, about finding the strength to begin again when the world felt like it was falling apart. I called Megan that night. We talked for hours, catching up, sharing our plans for the future. She was as excited as I was about the book deal, but more than that, she was proud. Proud of how far we had both come. She reminded me of how far I had traveled from that woman who had been trapped in her own silence. And I realized in that moment just how much I had grown. The past was never going to disappear, but I didn't need it to define me anymore. I had learned to take the lessons from it, the painful lessons, and turn them into something new, something that could inspire others. The writing process was not as easy as I had imagined. There were days when the words didn't come, when I felt like I had hit a wall. Writing about my past, about the darkness I had lived through, was draining. But as I wrote, I also felt a sense of release. It was as if each sentence was a weight lifted off my shoulders. In between the writing, I took trips to visit Megan, and we spent weekends together, trying to rebuild the sisterhood that had been lost to so many years of silence. She was still busy with her own work, but we made time for each other. I watched her as she signed copies of her books for readers who were eager to hear more about her journey. There was a sense of awe in her eyes, as if she couldn't quite believe how far she had come. Megan wasn't the same person who had been locked away in that attic. She was vibrant, confident, and she had learned to embrace the world again. She had not only reclaimed her life, but she had shared her story with the world in a way that would help so many others. As I watched her interact with her fans, I realized that maybe I could do the same. Maybe my story could help someone else feel less alone. Maybe someone out there needed to hear what I had to say. There were moments of peace, moments when I could sit in my new life and simply breathe. But there were also moments when the past would resurface. It wasn't just the memories of Lucas or the secrets he had kept. It was the quiet reminders of the woman I used to be, the one who had spent so much time hiding. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the house we had once shared. The door was still the same, the porch light still flickering on and off as it always had. For a brief moment, I thought about going inside, seeing if anything had changed. But I knew better. The house wasn't mine anymore. And it never could be again. I turned and walked away, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. The years that followed were the beginning of a new chapter for both Megan and me. She had gone on to publish several more books, and they were just as successful as the first. She had become a voice for the voiceless, a symbol of strength and resilience. But she wasn't just a survivor, she was a force in the literary world, her words shaping minds and opening hearts. As for me, my own writing career began to take shape. I wasn't as well known as Megan, but I didn't need to be. I wrote for myself, for the catharsis, for the chance to speak the words I had kept locked away for so long. The book I wrote was a reflection of everything I had gone through. A memoir, yes, but also a guide for anyone who had ever felt lost, who had ever been betrayed, who had ever wondered if they could start again. It was my way of showing the world that there was always light at the end of the tunnel, that no matter how dark the past may seem, there is always a chance to rewrite the future. One evening, as I sat by the window in my apartment, watching the sunset cast warm, golden light across the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. True peace. It wasn't something that could be found in the absence of pain. It was something deeper, something that came from within. The journey had been long, but it had led me to this moment. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and now I was free. Free to be who I was meant to be. Free to create the life I had always wanted. I picked up the phone and called Megan. "You know," I said, my voice steady, "I think I finally understand what it means to be free." She laughed softly, her voice full of warmth. "Took you long enough." I smiled, knowing that she was right. But I had made it. And now, I was ready to live the life I had always dreamed of. The freedom I felt after completing my book was liberating, yet it was bittersweet. I had spent so many years avoiding my own truth, burying the emotions that had piled up in the wake of Lucas's lies. But now, here I was, standing on the other side of it, and there was an overwhelming sense of clarity that I had never known before. I had learned to forgive myself, not just for the things I had missed, but for the things I had failed to see. I had lived my life in the shadows, hidden from the reality that was right in front of me. But now, I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't have to hold on to the past to define who I was. I could let it go and create something better. Megan and I continued our conversations, often late into the night, exchanging stories of our progress. She had found love again, with someone who appreciated her for who she truly was, not for the woman she had been forced to become. She had begun traveling, exploring the world she had been shut out from for so many years. And with every new chapter in her life, I saw her bloom. It was as if the world had finally opened up to her. In many ways, our paths had mirrored each other. We had both been trapped, in different ways, by the people who were supposed to protect us. But now we were free. And it was a freedom that we both cherished, even when it came with its own set of challenges. As time passed, I realized that there was still one thing I had yet to fully embrace: moving forward. I had been so focused on the past, on what had been taken from me, that I had forgotten to truly live in the present. The book was finished, Megan's success was growing, but there was still a part of me that hadn't let go of the years I had spent locked in a cycle of fear and guilt. One afternoon, while sipping coffee at a cafe I had come to love, I overheard a conversation at a nearby table. Two women were discussing their plans to travel the world, to see places they had always dreamed of but had never visited. They talked about adventure, freedom, and the excitement of stepping outside of their comfort zones. For a moment, I found myself lost in their words. Adventure. Freedom. I hadn't thought about those things in years. I had been too consumed by the weight of everything that had happened. But hearing their conversation awakened something inside me. I wasn't just going to live out the rest of my life in the comfort of what I knew. I was going to take that leap, to explore the world, to discover new things about myself and what I was capable of. So, I did it. I booked a flight to Paris. When I arrived in Paris, everything felt surreal. The cobblestone streets, the aroma of fresh croissants drifting from the bakeries, the sound of French being spoken around me. It was like stepping into a dream. I had never traveled alone before, and there was a strange exhilaration that came with being completely on my own, in a city full of strangers. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to be anyone else. I didn't have to be the wife who had been betrayed, or the woman who had carried the weight of the world. I could just be me. I wandered the streets, visiting museums, sitting in cafes, and watching the world pass by. It was liberating, and it reminded me of something important. I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. Happiness was something I could find within myself, and I had finally learned that. On one of my last days in Paris, I visited Montmartre, the artistic district. I found a quiet spot near the top of the hill, where I could look out over the city. The view was breathtaking. The city stretched out before me, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. It was the perfect place to reflect on everything I had been through. As I sat there, I realized how far I had come. I had once been a woman lost in the shadows of my past, but now I was standing in the light. I had rebuilt my life, step by step, and it was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. Months later I returned home, but I didn't return to the same life I had left behind. My apartment felt different now, a reflection of the woman I had become. The walls that once held memories of betrayal now echoed with the sound of a life reborn. Megan visited me soon after, and we sat in my living room, sipping tea and talking about our journeys. She told me about her new projects, her plans to write more books, and the places she hoped to visit. And I told her about my time in Paris, about the peace I had found there and the strength I had discovered within myself. We laughed, we cried, and for the first time in years, we didn't feel like victims. We didn't feel like we had been broken. We were two women who had reclaimed our lives, who had found the courage to move on. And for the first time, we both felt like we were exactly where we needed to be. In the months that followed, life became more of a quiet rhythm. I continued writing, pouring my heart into each word. My book had been well received, and I had even started working on a second one. I traveled more, meeting people who inspired me, finding pieces of myself I hadn't known were missing. But there was something else, something I hadn't expected. Peace. I had found a balance, a sense of contentment that had eluded me for so long. The road had been difficult, but it had led me to this point. And I realized that the true journey wasn't about what had happened to me. It was about how I had chosen to move forward, to find the beauty in the brokenness, and to rebuild my life from the ground up. One evening, as I sat at my desk, writing the final words of my second book, I thought about everything that had led me here. The pain, the betrayal, the healing, and the strength that had come from it all. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this journey. I was stronger, wiser, and more in tune with the woman I was meant to be. And as I typed the last sentence, I smiled. The final chapter wasn't just the end of a book. It was the beginning of a new story. A story where I was finally the author, the one in control of my own fate. In life, we all face moments of betrayal, loss, and unexpected twists that shake our sense of self. But just like Samantha and Megan, the true strength lies in how we rise from those moments, not in the moments themselves. Healing takes time, and sometimes the hardest part isn't facing the pain, but finding the courage to move forward. The key is forgiveness. not just of others, but of ourselves. We often carry guilt, blame, and fear, but those feelings only keep us tied to the past. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over pain and building a future based on what we've learned, not what has been taken from us. Life may throw us off course, but we have the power to rewrite our story, one decision at a time. If you're facing your own struggles, remember, you have the strength to reclaim your voice, embrace the lessons, and create a life that reflects who you truly are. Don't let your past define your future. Take the reins and choose your path. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.